What's up, everybody? Bellman, Ryan Kostrowski here. This is DFS 5-Pack. Almost screwed up our last names to put the wrong one on the wrong guy. But hey, you know what? It's quarantine. We're all a little mushy-brained at this point. We are here to talk some year-long fantasy football. As you can see, we've obviously been pounding out the videos a little bit early. I've even found myself on YouTube listening to other people talk about, different ideas for fantasy this year, trying to get a better feel on some of the rookies and things like that. I know we're a ways out, man, but with no DFS rolling, it is time to talk fantasy football.
Yeah, it's the one thing that kind of everyone can get on board talking about no matter what at all times. So we've talked about a couple guys that, we haven't been that high on recently. I'm really interested to see if that changes with the guy we talk about today.
Most definitely. We're here to talk Josh Jacobs of the Oakland Raiders, as most of you guys know. Before we get into him, I do want to give a quick shout out to show sponsor Overlay Fantasy Sports. Right now on the 12th of May, obviously there's no contest up here because there's no sports to talk about. But because this video is not like our typical DFS stuff where it's only good for a day, because this is good for 4 months, come football season, and if we get some basketball and baseball beforehand, go hop on Overlay. It feels like forever since I've played. Like, thinking about DraftKings is one thing, but when I started about really thinking about doing like an overlay, it's like, God, it seems like sports is so long ago.
Yeah, for sure, because DK is like ingrained in us. Like, we've done it for years and years, like every single day. Overlay is still like kind of a new phenomenon.
Definitely. So this Josh Jacobs kid is getting a lot of buzz around the fantasy football world for good reason. I spent some time really looking into a few things about him this morning, looking at some stuff about the Oakland Raiders. From what I have been hearing, the scuttlebutt throughout the social media world, a lot of people are high as Snoop Dogg when it comes to Josh Jacobs this year, really liking what he has to offer. And I get all the hubbub around him. I think this guy's got a lot of potential this year. It sounds like from the brief discussion we had in the early part of this video, sounds like you like him this year as well.
I'm about it, man. I am about it. He is a popular guy, but like you said, he's popular for good reason. I think that above all else, like we've talked about this a lot, a couple main things go into being a good running back: talent and opportunity. He's got both, man. He's really, really talented, and he's got the opportunity. So I like him quite a bit this year for a Raiders team that I think could surprise some people.
I'm with you on that one. Looking into him a little bit more this morning, I am with that. And I have been hard on the Raiders. So you and I have taken two opposite approaches on the Oakland Raiders with John Gruden coming back. And we've both been a little bit wrong. I was too hard on them, and you probably liked them too much. And the answer was a little bit more in the middle. But I think on this year might be we agree on this one. I can see them being a little bit of a sleeper. Now, before we get into the reason why, guys, like and subscribe to the video. We appreciate everybody who gives a thumbs up. It really does help. If you haven't been to this channel yet, subscribe for more fantasy football and DFS info. Hit the bell for notifications. Let's talk about a couple of things that we got into real briefly right there, and that is this is the third year now under John Gruden. Again, we've had a little disagreements on the first two seasons. It sounds like we're starting to meet in the middle on this one. Greg Olson back for the third year as the offensive coordinator. And while Jacobs had some injury issues last year, he did play through them a bunch. He missed a couple games, but played through them a lot. I see no lingering injury issues, and it sounds like we agree on that 100% as well.
Yeah, I expect, everyone in the NFL has injury concerns just because of how violent the game is, but nothing specific for Jacobs himself. I expect a monster year from him, assuming he can stay healthy.
I agree with you. So his rookie season, he played in 13 games, toted the rock 242 times on the ground for 1,150 yards, 7 touchdowns, long run of 51 yards per attempt, 4.8. That's real good. His lack of production within the receiving game is probably the biggest area of upswing that we can see this season, and we'll talk that over a little bit more further into the video. But only had 20 catches last year on 27 targets. That's about 1.5 catches per game. That is not very good, and with most people playing in the PPR type of format, that's his biggest cause for concern, right? Like, there's not a lot that I'm worried about when it comes to actually running the ball. It would be nice to see a little bump up in the receiving game.
For sure, and I expect that.
I have a question for you, and you might know the answer because I don't have it. Is there a good reason to expect that?
I think the good reason to expect it is they know that he's their best offensive player. He's really good. So they want to get him the ball whenever they can. I think that's the best reason is they want the ball in his hands, and it only makes sense to start getting him more involved in the passing game. I don't see him as a guy who can't do it just something he really wasn't used to, wasn't asked to do it last year. Oakland had a couple other pass catching running backs that they used in that role. I think they only expand Jacobs this year. I mean, why wouldn't they? I guess my question would be.
So it's just a common sense approach, which I can get on board with, right? He is your best offensive player. Common sense would want you to get him more involved in the passing game. Same when we talked about Derrick Henry real briefly the other day. Common sense would tell you, let's get him a few more touches and a few more looks within the passing game because our team goes as he has the rock in his hands.
For sure. I agree with you 100%.
Okay. I didn't know if you had heard anything that maybe was said within the Raiders organization because I'm all about just taking a common sense approach sometimes, and that would be a common sense approach I am down with.
Cool.
All right. So, I spent more time looking into the Raiders today. It sounds like you were kind of on the same wavelength as I was on this one. They didn't make, I would say, major splashes, but they did add some pieces throughout the offense. One, they added a veteran wide receiver to Nelson Aguilar. Is Aguilar like a difference maker? No, he's not a difference maker, but he's a veteran. He's a solid, number 3 type of fellow right there. If for a team that's not very strong at the wide receiver position, it's nice to add a guy like that. They drafted a couple of guys, including going with Henry Ruggs, 12th overall in the first round. What do you know about Ruggs? What do you like about him or dislike?
Ruggs was a reach at number 12. He was the first wide receiver off the board when he really wasn't expected to be at all. Definitely wasn't the most productive wide receiver in college. The one thing he really does have going for him is he was the fastest guy at the combine, fastest receiver.
Classic Raiders pick, right?
Classic Raiders pick. And he did play at Alabama, and he was good. Alabama had one of the deepest receiving cores in that I can ever remember last year. Ruggs being one of them. Jerry Jeudy's another guy I've mentioned to you. It was astonishing to me that Ruggs went ahead of Jeudy, and I could see him busting out because this seems like a typical Raiders pick. It reminds me a little bit of the John Ross pick by the Bengals. But I will give Gruden and the Raiders, Mike Mayock, more credit than that. Obviously, it was more than the speed, and I like this spot for him. We talked about how we think the Raiders can be better. Maybe that they're right and everyone else is wrong, and Ruggs really was the best receiver in the class.
You're not all in on him, but you expect more than Darius Hayward-Bay.
Yes, exactly. I think there's question marks, but I'm not automatically just like, oh, it's the Raiders. It's wrong. I think that they've improved in that regard. And I do like the other picks that they added. I think they got serious value and upside in Edwards out of South Carolina and Lynn Bowden from Kentucky. Lynn Bowden is a guy I could see touching the ball a lot. He's a do-it-all type. Yep. So, yeah, I think that, like you said, there's no one guy that stands out here. But I like the addition of Aguilar. I like the addition of Jason Witten. And I think Mariota is more than capable of being a solid backup. And before I let you continue, the one thing I'll say about Aguilar, because no, he's not a stud, and he is more like a number 3 wideout. I definitely think that getting out of Philly helps him.
Yeah, and I just think that this is for the Raiders' purposes. He's not a bad player, right? He's not a great player. He's not going to be a difference maker to the point that, you feel like this changes the culture. Well, I was going to say in Oakland, but obviously that's not where they are anymore for the Raiders. But it's not a bad spot for a team that was really weak right there. Again, I was reading about this Bowden kid this morning. Sounds like he's a bit of a project. So he doesn't, while that could be some upside here, and they could definitely look to get him a couple touches per game. I can't really envision it really eating into Josh Jacobs. They added Devontae Booker and re-signed Jalen Richard. Again, the only thing that I see on this one is Richard is a solid PPR type of back, good receiver out of the backfield, averaging, I think, 40 catches per season through his first 4 years. That's just another reason maybe Jacobs doesn't get a lot of looks at running back when it's 3rd and 9, but you can't get every touch anyways, right? Only Christian McCaffrey does that.
A couple things. So, yeah, if he were getting all those passing looks, he'd be a top 5 pick. He's not.
Yes, exactly.
You know what I mean? He's not, and that's the reason why, but he checks all the other boxes. As far as Devontae Booker goes, I think he sucks. It's a lateral move for Dwayne Washington, who they did re-sign.
Burn, Booker, burn. You're a lateral move from Washington. That hurts.
But you're right, though. Richard, he will get catches because that's what he's on the roster for. But I do think that, they start getting Jacobs the rock a little bit more just in the passing game because that's if the running back can do it, that's how teams are adapting, in my opinion.
So I think the biggest concern for this team right now is the quarterback position. Like, who is Derek Carr? We've seen really nice moments from him, and we've seen some less than stellar moments from him. What are your thoughts on the quarterback position? And is there any shape, way, or form you could envision Marcus Mariota, who I'm not a big fan of, taking over if Derek Carr doesn't play well?
Yeah, I can see it. Because listen, Mariota was the number 2 overall pick, and he comes with a lot of pedigree, and it's not like Derek Carr is some stud. I do think that Derek Carr is better than Mariota, though, and
So do I.
I think that he's got talent. I don't love the cut of his jib, but I think he's got talent.
Yeah, he can run the ball a little bit too. And if you're really going with this running attack, when we talked about
he makes some, sorry to interrupt, he makes some stupid plays. I think he makes stupid plays. But we've talked about, he's definitely a guy that can move the football, though.
Yeah, another thing, Jason Witten's not very good anymore. Obviously he's old and he's seen better days, but you got to like the addition of a veteran presence like him in this locker room on a team that's still pretty young overall, doesn't have a lot of leadership. They grabbed a couple of wide receivers in the draft, added this project and Lynn Bowden. There's definitely reasons to be encouraged if you're a Raiders fan right now, which all of that could be good for Jacobs, because I'm with you. He is the guy right there. He is the guy that the offense is based around. And to be completely frank on it, outside of McCaffrey and Saquon Barkley, I don't think it's impossible. Assuming not factoring in injuries, right? Because we saw Saquon get hurt last year. I could put Jacobs' upside as high as running back 3 within the NFL this year.
I agree. There's not that much difference. When you look at what they're, I was going to say him and Zeke. I think that Zeke will catch more passes, but Jacobs more of a vocal point of the offense. So just touching on your Jason Witten point, I love that signing, if for no other reason, kind of with what you talked about, but even taking it a step further, to kind of take Darren Waller under his wing, who is second best offensive player. And that's, their 1 is Jacobs, their 2 is Waller, and that's pretty clear,
And then Tyrell Williams is not a bad wide receiver, but he doesn't change the offense the way a Julio Jones or a Michael Thomas does.
Right. Waller and Jacobs have that potential. Those guys are real good. I'm interested to see if they can take a step forward this year.
Yeah, so again, I'm encouraged by what the Raiders are doing. They re-signed Richie Incognito. Well, we go back to the scandal in Miami a while back. He may not be the best dude in the world, but he's a solid offensive lineman, which can only, continue to push the running game in the right direction.
Yeah, I know that they've drafted. We don't talk about the defense on these shows, but I know that they've drafted a bunch in their secondary recently. So I'm a believer in this Raiders team.
This is okay. So, we've talked about this. There's a 1-2 pecking order in the AFC right now with the Ravens and the Chiefs. That's pretty clear. And, we've talked about who is the 3rd best team in the AFC. We've mentioned teams like the Bills, the Steelers. We don't really know where we go for the 3rd best team. I'm not going to put the Raiders up there, but if the end of the season, the Raiders are 10-6 and are, have a solid playoff spot, I wouldn't be flabbergasted by it. I wouldn't bet on it, but it wouldn't be a shocker. To me, if all of a sudden, I'm trying to think who might be the worst team in the AFC. Whatever, but it just wouldn't be a complete shock to me, I guess.
I get what you're saying. It definitely wouldn't be for me either, and that's football. I guess we talked about the worst team, even Cincinnati. Now that they have a quarterback, I don't expect them to go 10-6, but if they go 8-8, 9-7, I'm not shocked at all.
Yeah, the AFC is weak too, right? It's outside of those 2 teams. The Ravens are good. The Chiefs are Super Bowl champions, are clearly really good. Those 2 teams, you feel really confident in being solid, but there's no other team I would bet my dog's life is going to go over 500 in the AFC.
Yeah, and that really gives me good hope for the Browns.
Well, it's a good spot for him to be this year, right? So, what is Jacobs' current draft position? So, I see him ranked anywhere from 12th to 27th. But 15 is the number that I would really base him on right now, based on some extensive research I did on this one last night and early this morning. So we're talking in a 10-team draft, mid-second round. This is a dude that I have no problem reaching for. If you like Jacobs, if you are a Jacobs believer this year, and you want to draft him with, say, the 9th overall pick, especially in a standard, man, go for it, because you won't get him in the 2nd round. I feel like this guy is going to be pumped up and absolutely gushed over by the fantasy industry for the next couple of months. That I think his ADP has the potential to be 12, 11.
I want him. Listen, if you pick 10th overall, seriously, if you're picking like 8th, 9th overall and you want him there, I think you can take him. There's a chance he might get to you on the way back. But there's also a chance he might not, and that's ultimately the problem with snake drafts. So, yeah, I like him a lot, man.
So I joke around about that blowhard on Instagram all the time and like what he's talking about. This is one where I agree with him. And just because there's somebody that you might not like from a media perspective, whether that be like on a big ESPN or somebody on Instagram or YouTube, doesn't mean that you can't agree with them on certain things. Like I don't agree with Skip Bayless a lot, but sometimes I think he is right about some things. So one thing that he said was people who draft Nick Chubb over Josh Jacobs are insane. I would have to agree with that one. It doesn't mean it won't work out that way. And if Kareem Hunt were to get hurt or something like that, I would feel differently. But I like Jacobs significantly better than Nick Chubb.
I like him significantly better also, but I wouldn't say it's insane just because of how good Chubb is.
Okay. Yeah, Chubb's good, but there ain't no Kareem Hunt on the Oakland Raiders this year.
No, so it makes Jacobs the better pick in my mind, but that doesn't make it like insane to me.
Nick Chubb might be better than Jacobs. We could talk all day long, but you mentioned in the beginning, talent and opportunity. The opportunity for Jacobs is superior.
It is. I think Jacobs is better, but I think it would be insane to take. I think it would. Let's think. I'm gonna look at a guy. I think it would be insane to take over him because I just don't think Nick Chubb is who you would go there because most people have Chubb, ranked right there. I don't necessarily agree with it.
Chubb's also a guy who I think's ADP is going to fall because the fantasy industry is talking very negatively about it right now, and it's all about the same reasons that we've talked about with the addition of Kareem Hunt.
This is true. I don't disagree with that at all. I'll talk to a guy that I think it's insane to take Le'Veon Bell over Josh Jacobs.
Oh, hell yeah.
That's what I think is insane. And honestly, like I'm looking at Eric Carabell's top 200 PPR rankings. He's got Nick Chubb 14th and Josh Jacobs 26th. So
that's wrong for me. That's kind of what I was talking about. I would take Jacobs over Nick Chubb right now. No questions about it. So let's get into a couple of these, existential questions that I was kind of going to bring up. Jalen Richard is averaging 40 catches per year through his first 4 seasons on this team. That is the biggest detriment to Jacobs' game is the lack of production pass catching. But I think we both agree that the common sense approach is Jalen Richard's not terrible if it's 3rd and 13, he's a guy who can catch passes, but he ain't changing the culture in Oakland. If you can get Jacobs more involved in the passing game, there's a huge potential bump up right there. It would just make sense to get your best playmaker the ball.
For sure. We see that eye to eye. Again, I don't like Richard being there, but every team has to have like backup running backs. So
yeah, exactly, right?
Jacobs is going to get the rock.
Okay. I agree with you. Most of these are at best devil's advocate type of questions because I believe he is the guy who takes 80% of the touches out of the backfield for this team, both via the running game and the passing game. So I'm with you. We've kind of touched on Bowden, who is a project, it seems like, and then they'll try to probably get him a couple touches per game in almost like an interesting type of package, but he ain't taking carries out of the backfield away from Jacobs.
Nah, they'll get him the rock. He might eat into Richard's workload.
Yeah. And Booker, again, not really a thing. I'm with you on that one. So any chance he isn't a bell cow, I just can't see it. People ride their running backs while they're good for a few years, and then you move on. It's an easy position to fill. Maybe the next kid you draft won't be as good as Jacobs, but I really struggle to see any scenario where he's not a bell cow.
Yeah, I think he catches 100 balls before he's not the bell cow. Like, I think him catching 100 balls is more likely than him not being the bell cow.
I won't go quite that far because catching 100 passes is tough, but I don't think you're insane for saying it. So I think we ultimately end up at the same spot right here. Like, he's the dude. There aren't a lot of guys in the NFL anymore that you can feel very confident are going to see, 80% of the touches out of the backfield, maybe even higher than that. It could be 85 or something like that. And we feel pretty good about that. And even in close games, it could be 90%.
For sure.
Okay. 20 catches in his rookie year in 13 games is not great, right about a catch and a half per game. We both seem to be pretty confident that's going to bump up. And another thing is this dude averaged almost 5 yards per carry last year, but without looking it up, I feel like he played like 3, 4, 5 games where like he should barely have even been on the field. So, I mean, that's got a lot of room for, being replicable, if not better.
No doubt, man. Big time buying signs just in that regard. Love that he played through that. And he showed just so many really good runs last year. I remember they played the Packers one game, didn't they? And he had a couple real good runs.
It was a weird game. It was a really weird game because Green Bay's defense played terrible and let Oakland kind of run up and down the field. Like Green Bay had a couple of weird plays that made the game not as close as it really was because Oakland actually played pretty well at times. It was an odd game, but he definitely looked the part as a high-end running back in that game.
Yeah, that's what he is. And you're right. He is not Saquon. He is not McCaffrey. But who is besides those two?
I mean, those two dudes are on another level. The drop-off after those guys is pretty big in my opinion, and they're both phenomenal.
I guess, like, my question for you before we wrap up is, like, I agree that Jacobs has hot as number 3 running back upside, but I still couldn't take him over, like, Dalvin Cook.
I think Dalvin Cook is better. People are obviously – I'm not as concerned about Dalvin Cook's injuries as other people are. Like, he had a major injury year 1. You're very rarely 100% recovered unless you're a freak like Adrian Peterson year 2. And I'm a Dalvin Cook fan. But if you really believed in Jacobs, do your thing. And the problem is Cook is just so much bigger part of the passing game already.
Yeah. I think he's getting slept on this year. Like, he is a close number. I think he, for me, is the number 3.
Yeah, and then as long as you handcuff him with Madison, if you're really worried about the injury history, then I get that. I guess that is the other problem with him, though, is his backup can play. Yes,
this is true. So it's not even just like about having the handcuff. It's about like how much is he going to eat into him for sure.
Like Madison's a top 30 running back in the NFL and would be the starter on probably a dozen teams.
Yeah, I'd have to like look at it, but I don't disagree with that.
Right? Like, I mean, if he was in – trying to think of the right situation of where you could put him. But, like, I don't know because Geis is there. I was going to say Washington, but if Geis was ever healthy, he's pretty good. Anyways, we don't need to pontificate on that for too long. The guy can play. All in all, I think we both kind of agree the upside of Jacobs, assuming that everybody's healthy, is as high as number 3. I wouldn't draft him ahead of Zeke. I wouldn't draft him ahead of Dalvin Cook. But legitimately, after that guy and Michael Thomas, like, I can make the argument for Jacobs over Kamara. I don't even think that's a difficult argument to make.
Yeah, I'm with you. If I'm drafting like 7th overall, I'm looking at him hard.
Right? And don't you think that the mainstream consensus is going to be Alvin Kamara?
Definitely.
All right. And, like, I think Derrick Henry is probably better than Jacobs, but I don't think it's insane to think that Jacobs does get a bigger bump up in the passing game this year. And at the end of the year, outscore Derrick Henry. I would still draft Derrick Henry first, but I don't think you're insane to think that way.
Man, the guy I like a lot that we'll make a video on soon is Austin Eckler.
Yeah, I think you are bigger on Eckler than I am. I like Eckler. I struggle to see him with all the consistent big plays. And he can't be a bell cow, right? Because he's just too little. But I do like his talent a lot.
Yeah, talk about a guy that could catch 100 balls.
Well, for me, the other part about Eckler is Phillip Rivers has got a long history of checking down to running backs, and it doesn't mean that every quarterback is going to do that.
True.
So I was listening to this dude talk about that last night and why they because we talked about Jonathan Taylor yesterday. And I thought that was an interesting point that maybe made me rethink what I said yesterday about Jonathan Taylor getting more touches in the passing game because, well, we may not think he's great, but we know Marlon Mack doesn't catch a lot of balls.
I've heard that Marlon Mack is going to take definitely, potentially I've heard that that they might get Marlon Mack involved in the passing game.
Okay. It'll be interesting to watch play out, but that was something that kind of got that idea percolating in my mind is like going back to the days of LT. Phillip Rivers loves to drop it down to the running back. One of the things my boy Aaron Rodgers does not typically do a great job of is just taking the 5-yard check down. I mean, Phillip Rivers will take the 5-yard check down.
So I don't disagree with you that, every quarterback won't do it. but Tyrod Taylor will do it. And, you know, they have a rookie QB behind him who, if he comes in, I would suspect to do it. So I think your point is definitely valid. I'm just not too worried about it in that situation.
Yeah, I mean, and that doesn't mean that I'm right. You could easily be right and I could be wrong. I mean, this will happen back and forth on guys, you know, throughout the seasons in sports. I'm just not quite as big on him as you are. It doesn't mean I don't think Austin Eckler is insanely fun to watch. He's a big play waiting to happen every single time he touches the ball. He should be a focal point of that offense. I mean, I get why you like him. I just, again, we'll disagree a little bit on where we would draft him probably.
For sure. I get that.
But we will do a video on him and talk about him in more detail soon, guys. In the meantime, if you haven't given that thumbs up already, we sincerely appreciate everybody who does that. Subscribe to the network if you have not done it yet. Hit that bell for notifications. And Bossman Bellman over there and myself will continue to pound out these fantasy football videos.
Thanks, guys.